Well, man, well, I'll just kind of start off a little bit, just kind of let you know, Mike, kind of what we're all about. Um, we started the Righteous Savages podcast a little over a year ago. My background is I'm retired. I just retired last year after 29 years of law enforcement down here at Carbondale, Illinois. Did everything you could possibly do in law enforcement as far as just, investigations and drug work and SWAT team. Was a SWAT commander for 12 years. Retired last year. We've had a gun range here in Southern Illinois called Tombstone Gun Range, running for 11 years now, doing civilians, law enforcement, all kinds of training. Had Fieldcraft out to our place, over a dozen times. So it's been a real good relationship with you guys. So we appreciate being able to do that with you guys. And so we've been doing the Righteous Savages podcast for about a year now. We're kind of, I guess we're in the same vein as kind of Kyle Thompson and, Undaunted and a lot of those type of guys where we're doing training, we're doing firearms gear, all that kind of stuff. But we're really trying to inspire people that might have just kind of been sitting in the shadows for a while. I was kind of that guy. It kind of, I was a Christian my whole life, but I never said a whole lot about it. And I didn't really try to convince anybody the way I believe or anything. But now we're trying to get this movement going where guys just aren't afraid to say the truth, to say how they really feel about life, about, their faith, politics, whatever. And it really helps to have people that can stand up and be like, hey, me too. And it just kind of starts a wave, just a tidal wave where everybody starts to come together. And I wonder, just of all the podcasts you've done over the years, is that a kind of trend you're seeing too, where there's more and more guys and people out there that are willing to talk about, their faith, their beliefs, what they really believe in, and trying to inspire, people to be the best they can be?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're spot on. I feel that way. I've also felt compelled in recent past to talk about my convictions and nearly felt guilty not doing that, especially accumulating a following and an influence. And I think it's just like everything that's grassroots. A lot of people are just getting back to basics because that's what you default after you lose yourself or a society loses itself. So, yeah, I see that as a trend more and more. Sean Ryan's done it. I've done it. A lot of people have done it. And I think it's appropriate given the times. You could probably associate it with the fourth turning, just a generational time of, renovation at a minimum is what we need. And so, yeah, I think it's important to talk about that. I'm glad. One, thanks for your service in law enforcement. That's a tough job, man. You guys do a lot of difficult things. We got to come home to peace, at least our version of it, and cycle through it. But you guys never find that. And so faith is a good way to stay grounded and sane. And I think the more we can talk about it, the better we'll all be.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're in your time in the service, I've heard you talk about before how, once you joined the military, you were serious about everything. You didn't mess around. You didn't drink a lot. You didn't waste a lot of time. You were very focused on the mission of being a war fighter, essentially. How much of that, even though, like for me, I wasn't that outspoken in my law enforcement career. I wish I had been, but it still kind of grounded me. My faith grounded me. And if I felt like it gave me, I still had a purpose. Like, I think this is what I was meant to do. And I think God wants me to be here. And it gave me a confidence to do the dangerous stuff. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, when you were did kind of that foundational belief system, did that kind of ground you and give you confidence to know that you were doing the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, virtue and my upbringing that was deeply ingrained in me as a young child from my father, who was also in the military, and his dad was in the military, and his dad's dad was in the military. So we have a long line of service. To be honest, I thought it was accepting that I would likely be killed in combat. In fact, I got married in 2006 to a girl I was dating at the time after a really bad nearly year-long tour as a Green Beret in Afghanistan. That's where we lost a whole bunch of SEALs and operators in Operation Red Wings and the whole Mark Luttrell and lone survivor situation. 3 helicopters crashed in the vicinity of where I was operating at. Lots of guys were killed. And so I was like, I'm likely not going to make it through this whole campaign. And I knew what I signed up for. And I wasn't bummed about it because I knew where my salvation was. I knew deep down in my beliefs from a young child that I was doing God's work. And I think all the warriors that I was serving with at the time shared that belief or something like that. I mean, sure, there was always the Valhalla guys, right, who watched some Viking movie or something, Braveheart, maybe. I don't know what it is. That became trendy, but for the most part, the core was Christians who felt like they were being compelled to serve and fight. And we were fighting an enemy who looked at us as non-believers. And certainly we took that very serious. I mean, everything from the esprit de corps, the branding nearly of everything that we were fighting for, the task force, all the logos, all the prayers prior to operations. So yeah, it was much so ingrained in us, and I wasn't afraid to die. I was surprised that I made it out alive and felt very grateful and lucky. I hate to say this, I almost felt disappointed because I was like, well, what's the point of being a warrior and being on the battlefield? Like, you serve, you bleed, you sacrifice, and then at the end of it, everything's fine. And then what do you do next? Which I think is transitionally a lot of issues that a lot of men deal with, period, no matter what their line of work is and where they retire from. They're always looking for that purpose. So I feel like I served my purpose, but it was kind of odd coming out of that and going, okay, well, man, I thought I had a conclusive narrative of how this was going to end up. And now here I am, and I had to start all over again.
Yeah. So when you came back, obviously you had that basically you've been full of all of this war, everything, and you come back and you felt like you didn't have a purpose. So where did that lead you, I guess? When you get back, where does that lead you? And what were the steps that got you basically where you're at now?
Yeah, I think it was always founded and grounded in service of some kind. I mean, I didn't start Fieldcraft to make money. I mean, Fieldcraft Survival is a business, and I haven't gotten rich off of Fieldcraft Survival. In fact, it's the complete opposite of that. The idea was taking a whole bunch of the skills and lessons learned from combat, even skills that didn't even fare me well, where I lost teammates, and just had some profound lesson learned that maybe a civilian or a law enforcement officer or even a military member could not have to make that same mistake in their lifetime. And so I found it profound to be able to communicate that. And a lot of it was about personal therapy. I mean, I always tell people, like, I didn't podcast. I've been podcasting for a decade. I didn't podcast for you or for companies or for service. I podcasted because it felt good to get that stuff out of my head and vocalize it. I'm sure you guys have had those similar feelings. It's healthy for you to kind of get that out. And so I found profound purpose in seeing the light bulb go off in a civilian a soccer mom who had never even thought about this concept of being prepared, and, teaching her or a group of people how to apply a tourniquet. I looked at that, and over the course of time, whether it was technical or inspiring people, I was driven off of that, and it fueled me. And then, it changed a little bit. There was a whole bunch of evolutions of Fieldcraft in my life, and even to where I'm at today. But that was the foundation of it, was service.
Yeah. So now you've done a lot of training with civilian law enforcement in the United States. And I think, and you can fill in some information here on your first or second deployment. I'm not sure what you kind of set up a small army of Afghans to be a fighting force over there, right? What was that like taking some of these people that, I mean, talk about zero skills. I'm guessing some of these people, I'm sure they never had a lesson on how to, the basic fundamentals of shooting a handgun or a rifle. So what was it like getting those folks trained up just with the basic skills of or firearms?
Yeah, I think that particular experience for me differentiated my experiences as a Green Beret. Most experiences as Green Berets, especially for the time period that I served, and I think even special operators' experiences, doing unilateral operations with your teammates is very different than being, for example, my first rotation in a remote fire base in Afghanistan, not speaking the language, not understanding fully the culture, and not technically, but actually being behind enemy lines and training up a partisan force that wasn't the Army, wasn't a police force, a border patrol, but just civilians, and not basic civilians who had some kind of aptitude for life or skill sets that they honed, but people out of the hinterlands of Afghanistan who didn't even have a pair of tennis shoes, who spoke no English, had no ability to write even in their own language, and could barely speak their own language, typically a Pashtun. And so that was a challenge, but it was very fulfilling because I kind of realized early on these people weren't just doing a job. These people were literally every single day risking their lives for the freedom of their country. And that came with a lot of sacrifice, but also a lot of personal courage. I mean, these people, man, they hadn't even touched an AK-47 before. And I had to teach these guys. I always love when the command structure was like, are you focused on their physical fitness and getting them trained up? Like, are we using CrossFit and all these things? I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to get them to eat bread and protein just to function cognitively through the day. I'm just trying to keep them awake. And you're asking me if I've put them through workouts of the day? I'm like, man, you're living in a different planet in your tactical operations center than I'm living in the dirt in Afghanistan. And it's also that whole correlation experience and how it translated to civilians and even personal attacks on me early on a decade ago, being one of the first guys to train civilians in first aid tactics, where I was criticized even by members of my own organization that you shouldn't be teaching civilians that. And I'm like, well, I taught civilians in a dozen different countries how to defend their homeland, their families, and their communities. But for some reason, that offends a lot of former warfighters, even existing warfighters, if I'm training civilians. 4 years ago, I would talk about bug out, and that was a big controversial topic. November, 3 months before COVID hit the ground, and I heard about it being in China, talking about that, again, caused a lot of controversy. But as time will tell, and history shows us, it's like, don't write anything off. I mean, these lessons that we've learned, we should pay attention to. And now I'm not afraid. I mean, I've been through a lot in the past and recently, and it's made me, with my conviction and my faith, not afraid of anybody but God himself.
Yeah,
that's a big place to get to.
That training the Afghans reminds me of how most civilian law enforcement firearms instructors are with their agency. There's usually a lieutenant or a sergeant somewhere saying like, "Hey, Dave, we need to start this vehicle CQB, lesson, for the department." And you're like, "Vehicle CQB? How about
a zero?
How about taking the holster? Let's get a few more reps on that." So that's why I just thought there might be a lot of similarities there to teaching. So did you just have like an interpreter sitting there over your shoulder all day long? Like,
yeah, I used a lot of pointy talkie. Interpreters in that time period were worthless because they typically couldn't even convey what we were trying to illustrate, I mean, all the complexities of it. So I did a lot of pointy talking, and that's foundationally how I learned how to teach people, I think, pretty well, is I focus on the core of the basics and nothing advanced. I mean, even in law enforcement, when I have SWAT teams, if I'm training a SWAT team, for example, and they give me they allocate me the time, I'll spend a whole day with no kit, no guns, and just building efficiency and walking through the house. And people were like frustrated because like, what are you talking about? Like, we're a good SWAT team. We do this, we do that. I'm like, yeah, but have you built any efficiency on how to walk through doors? Do you know if you want to take a left into a point of domination, how to step into the room? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, do you guys do simultaneous clears where, both of you have to clear your points of domination at the same time in a center fed room? And they're like, oh yeah, I've never really thought about that. I'm like, okay, so maybe we should just focus on walking and doing some, CQB salsa before we pick up guns and start running and gunning. So yeah, it's fundamentally a part of my history, but so important in kind of laying the framework of what I do.
Yeah. 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 It's, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of crawling before walking, a lot of walking before running. All the classes I've ever done, it's always been the focus is on let's make you really good at something. And the fast that just should just come naturally later on once you get really good at something. So many people just want to, put the pedal to the metal and do some fancy, internet, whatever. Even in law enforcement, everybody seems to be wanting to just, do whatever the sexy, cool thing is. And of course, doing the slow stuff, that's not all exciting by any means, but usually the people, if they're serious about it, they're fine with doing, 80 reps a day, walking through a doorway. But it's hard to convince people that a lot of times with all the YouTube channels and all the people that are running on, 100 miles an hour with their hair on fire, it's still to this day, even with high quality instructors, it's still a tough sell to just, hey, let's slow down. I was in a class last week with an instructor, a very high speed, well known instructor, and he was pretty much on the high speed bandwagon of, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. All that stuff is nonsense. Fast is better. If you can't go, fast, then you're just screwing other stuff up. And I thought it's maybe for 1% of the people out there that might work, but or just the general population of cops who were generally training out there, or just civilians. It's a journey. It's like martial arts. It's like jujitsu. It's like whatever. Like this is not going to take. We can't probably do this in 6 hours.
I think I always train for the lowest common denominator, but that's the foundation. And out of 100 people, 99 are likely just pretending. If I go into a carbine course and everybody wants to run and gun and do linear targets and CQB and all this stuff, yeah, sure. If you're a well-trained unit and maybe you do it full time and that's your only job, I've been in those organizations, then I get it. But if you're a civilian, for example, and you don't live that full time, well, we got to start with the basics. And, I'll ask a class, what's your zero? How did a good one is, what's your zero? And a lot of people know zeros because they know what people have said. People have said, do a 5,200, do a 25,300. But I ask them how did they achieve that zero? And that's a little bit more difficult to answer. So I say, yeah, so you got a 25,300 zero. That's typical in an Army capacity because 25-meter ranges, that's squared away. The person who says I got a 100-yard zero, which is very common for civilians to say, that's a perfect one because especially you have a red dot on your M4. The first thing I say is, how did you achieve that? And most of them say, well, I just set up a target and, I just shot at it. I'm like, well, what's the acceptable variance of just shooting at a target? You shoot 3 rounds and say, I'm good to go. Did you shoot at a watermelon and you split the watermelon and you said, I hit the watermelon, so I'm zeroed? I said, there's more nuance to that. And in a class of 24 students, you'll get 24 different answers. So my whole thing is like, yeah, sure. military organizations, SWAT teams that do it full time, there's likely a standard operating procedure. But in civilian land, they're just going off of what potentially the experts say. And so I gotta start from the beginning. And what I always find is even the high speed guy showed up from LAPD or wherever is going to learn something that he never learned before. And special operations organizations that are the best, they don't go to ninja school. There's not a ninja school. All they do is rehome the basics, and that's how they become the masters of those skill sets.
I was lucky enough in 2010. I got on a multi-jurisdictional SWAT team in Illinois called ILEAS. And it's a statewide SWAT team. It got spun up after 2001, after all the Homeland Security money. And it was a weapons of mass destruction special response team. So it was geared for, hey, there's a dirty bomb in a warehouse in Chicago somewhere. We need to send some people. So they started sending people to some high-speed classes. So I got pretty familiar with a lot of the guys at Mid-South down in Mississippi, and kind of started a lot of us doing a lot of training down there over, a 7 or 8 year period. And that was, it was very just good stuff. And I thought, well, maybe, so now we're going to go down here with some Navy SEALs or some Delta guys, and we're going to learn the real
secrets.
And lo and behold, there weren't any. I was empty-handed because it was just the same thing for hours and hours over and over. The live fire shoot houses, and that was kind of I don't know if a competition style training facility. It kind of leaned on that a little bit, but it was still just the basics. It was just, you guys down there pushing lawnmowers one day, but they shot every day. And next thing you know, they're an instructor in Mid-South. And that's where I thought, man, that's
pretty crazy.
It's definitely the basic.
Yeah. So, in your life, you faced a ton of adversity. I would say military, you special operations. Obviously, that's not an easy job. That's like a top 1% alpha male type job. But did you find that adversity in the civilian in your life after the military has actually been tougher than actually being in the military, as just the adversity that you faced in your life?
Yeah, I think, even Green Beret's motto of being unconventional or somehow special makes people believe that we're cowboys. If you associate cowboys with being wild, what you find is even in cowboys that are squared away, they're the most structured, they're the most disciplined. Unconventional warriors or irregular warriors or operators are the best because of their ability to be fluid and adaptive to difficult circumstances, but it's likely because all the training discipline and all the things that prepare them for those operations. Civilian world is truly the Wild West because there's no structure to it. And, that's hard for a lot of people who have a timeline and they're used to operating off a whiteboard. And I found that pretty difficult, but I also found it, there's a romantic idea of the military, but the military sucks in a lot of ways, man. I can't even remember ever waking up past 5 or 6 in the morning because I was up at 4:30 getting prepped for a 5 o'clock movement. And that was 20 years of doing that. In civilian world, you don't have anybody, giving you time hacks or checking in on you, spot checking you. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people to adapt to. And then you have to kind of define your life, redefine who you are. I didn't have the hardest of time because I had a lot of discipline. Like I said, and like you talked about, I was never that guy. I just didn't drink. I didn't go to bars. I didn't chase women because I took my job very seriously. When I started Fieldcraft, I took the same approach, and it's why we grew so fast. And it's why, a lot of people knew about us in a short period of time because of the culture that we created early on. And so, yeah, it's difficult. So being a civilian, nobody cares about you. And if you don't have a family, a tribe, if you don't have good discipline in yourself, if you don't have something tethered to purpose like faith, it can make you lost. And so I was fortunate. I didn't have that difficult of a time, but it's not easy for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've, I mean, well known, you've had some recent adversity that you've had to deal with in your life, obviously. And you mentioned on one of your videos that it's helped you deepen your faith, find that kind of what you were rooted in from the get-go, the stuff that, getting down to the core, that we talk about fundamentals on the firing range, at the range. When you're training, you want fundamentals. That's the roots of everything that builds you into a great shooter, a great operator, a great police officer. But in our lives with our faith and just dealing with the world being this crazy thing that wants to pull you in 5 different directions at the same time, do you find that adversity is where you find the roots of who you are and what your foundation is, whether it be your faith or whatever that you believe in? That's really the for lack of a better term, the come to Jesus moments of like, yeah, I got to get back to this. I've got to strip all of that stuff away.
Yeah, I'm not immune to the difficulties and the catastrophes in life. I mean, I say it in that book, Sitting in Between Y'all. Disaster is an equal opportunist. It doesn't care who you are. It'll give you stage 4 cancer. It'll take your mom. It'll take your wife. It will take everything that you love and hold near and dear. And the most significant lesson learned that I've learned post-military experience, but I also learned it real time in the military, is you're not in control. It's not up to you. It's God's plan. And when you accept that, you take things in stride and you find some optimism in the most difficult of lulls, understanding that there is an end objective for you and you're not always going to see it. We always want, especially now in today's society, immediate feedback. But the reality is the entire journey has already been laid out for you. And, in the military, I've been around teammates that were good friends of mine that lost their lives, and operationally been involved in a lot of big, heavy operations where I came out unscathed. And people around me, especially people that were faithful, good Christians, always told me that there's a bigger plan for me. And I heard the same sentiment from people that were around me that loved me. And look, anybody listening to this, I don't want anybody to think that my situation is somehow unique. I think everybody's facing some kind of trial and tribulation that's difficult, way more difficult than the interpersonal issues that I had in my own family. But the thing that you're rooted in, you always get back to, and people are always like, you see all the feedback and all the things people are saying online. How does that make you feel? And man, don't worry about that. And I said, man, I don't worry about any of that. I don't judge myself based on a Instagram comment, a YouTube video, because I know who I am. And I also, at the core, know how broken people can be. And so I also have empathy for people who grift, who come out in the Me Too movement, who have all these self-identity issues because they're not grounded in anything. The only thing they're grounded in is their income, their material objects, or their popularity. I've never been like that. And people who know me at my core because they spend time around me know that's not who I am. It's never been who I am. So yeah, does it hurt? For sure it hurts. I mean, anybody talking poorly about you, any situation that turns you inside out and people lose faith in you, that hurts. But again, if I was not grounded in my faith, I wouldn't be as resilient and so quick to get back to it. And I'm not necessarily getting back to it for my own sake, because it does bring me profound purpose. A lot of people, I think, lean on me for advice and guidance. And I was that way when social media wasn't around, and I was a squad leader in the infantry. When I was a 20-year-old airborne ranger qualified tomb guard in the infantry, people depended on me. And so I don't do it for the gram. I do it for people because I truly love people. And I feel a responsibility, a burden of responsibility that drives me, incentivizes me, and that tethered to the faith makes me that resilient. And I tell you, if anybody's going through difficult times, when you do have that faith and when you do lean on that, something in you lets go. And when you let go of that control, because you know it's God's plan, that facilitates personal growth and makes you better.
Yeah, big time. That's so cool. And this might segue good into this new tattoo you got. I've seen
I
a
was
little
going
bit
to
about
say
it.
something about that. Yeah.
Saran wrap.
Yeah. Yeah, looks like you got pranked or something and you ran into some saran. Tell us what you got going on there and what that's all about.
Well, my mom and grandma on my grandma on my mom's side, and her mom would tell you and find it in the Bible how I shouldn't have put tattoos on myself. They're very critical of that. But when I explained the meaning, they're a little bit more empathetic. So I got a tattoo from 1914 expedition that took place by a man named Ernest Shackleton and his band of married men. He had 27 men total, including him, on this epic journey to do a transcontinental trip across Antarctica. And their goal was simply to be the first to cross it. The South Pole had already been declared by a Norwegian. They just wanted to do this epic journey. And long story short, they get caught up in on an ice cap. This iceberg stalls their ability to infill into the continent, but also exfil. And so they wind up getting stranded for nearly 2 years. It turns into this epic story of survival. What's kind of ironic, being a military guy, is the day they left, they actually left the day that World War I started. And they even, for a temporary amount of time, as they stopped to do some refitting before they actually got into the continent, asked Churchill if they should turn around because they needed men for the campaign. And at the time, they didn't need men for the campaign. They get back and they survive this harrowing story. And turns out some of them actually fought on the battlefield post the entire experience of surviving and died on the battlefield, which is not often talked about. I think I'd love to do another book on the whole story and talking about those details. But it's a tattoo of the ship they were on called the Endurance. And Shackleton's family motto was, "Through endurance we conquer." And I think there's something very special about that, because especially in a society that's driven by algorithms and data and social media applications, we're such in a rush. We want instant gratification. And when you realize you're running a marathon in life, you start to slow down and you start to be more conscious and aware and present for your children, for your family, and I think most importantly for yourself and God. So that's a constant lesson learned. It's a reminder to me to look at my arm and take a breath and take it slow. And I think it's something that I always want to advocate and communicate to people who are going through difficult times, because if 27 men could survive eating steel blubber on an iceberg for nearly a couple of years, then you can get through your difficult time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool story. I didn't know that some of them. I've heard the story before. I didn't know some of them actually fought in World War One. That's crazy. And
yeah, it's wild that you would get through something so difficult, so so insane as a perspective, but man, men and people were just programmed and built different back then. That was just called life. That was a hiccup. Yeah. They didn't have a lot, they in 1917, I have an autographed copy of Ernest Shackleton's 1917 first edition of the book called South, which is the story of everything that they went through. But they were so hard back then. They just did what had to be done, and what had to be done is fighting for their country, and that's what they did.
Now, back then they'd have 8 or 10 kids because they knew they're probably going to lose a couple of them to some kind of virus or just life. But
yeah,
crazy. Like, I don't think that most of us would survive in that time period very, very easily, for sure. We're too comfortable nowadays.
Yeah, Shackleton's got a ton of very specific tactics and leadership that's been taught to Fortune 500 companies, and it's a good lesson learned. But I think that type of adversity is a great lesson learned, that not everything comes in instant trauma. Some things take time, and it's like you wake up and you're having a difficult time in your life. It takes endurance to overcome that adversity. And again, rooted back in faith, having that faith is a great foundation to get back to, because, sometimes it's not going to happen overnight.
Yep. It's always your 0 point. Talked about zeroing a weapon. That's like your 0 point for life. Is
for sure. It's your North Star for sure.
I know, Mike, you've had some close calls in your military career. What was like the worst injury you ever had during your?
Yeah, I've crushed my back and knocked myself unconscious in free fall accidents, and taken shrapnel in the knee, which is pretty minor. I had a suicide bomber detonate in front of me. Man, I've been through a lot. I've ripped my hamstring off the bone in jiu-jitsu, training the Modern Army Combatus team in Colorado. I'd say the concussive blast have been the collective culmination of a long experience that I never really paid attention to, because you don't typically pay attention to that. As a breacher for a very long time, where, we got our blue chips, we call them, or cool guy points, by as many gates, walls, and, breaches we can make with explosive charges. I've been rattled a lot, and that's probably taken the most toll in traumatic brain injury, which is likely caused CTE, which is the devastating, diagnosis of brain damage that progressively gets worse with age, that a lot of my peers are affected with. But yeah, that's probably the worst in culmination. In one setting, eating a breach in a carport in Iraq once, where I didn't know where the breach point was, and I was like walking out in the middle of the yard, was probably one of the worst incidents that happened. And I was back the next morning prepping for that night's operation. So, I've had a culmination of bad injuries, but I'm lucky. I know a lot of guys who lost limbs. Obviously, a lot of guys lost lives. Overall, even with a TBI, I fared pretty well. I was a little bit smarter as a special operations guy. When guys were staring at the charge, I was hiding behind the wall. So that probably saved me a little bit of trauma.
Who would have thought getting away from the explosive was a good idea, right?
Yeah, not staring at it.
We talk about resilience, and that's kind of what we've talked about: resilience, endurance, and all of that kind of stuff. What would we, we got a lot of crazy things going on in the country right now. I don't know if you're aware. There's an election in like 2 weeks. It's may kick off some crazy things going on. But so as we, I think that you genuinely, just like us, we care about the country and the people in this country. We want to see a lot of positive things come out of this, and kind of a return to that center point. We talk about that. I think as a nation, we probably need to return to that center point in a lot of ways, and kind of our roots. And so what would be kind of Mike Glover's, 50,000 foot view of how people how we can return to that center point, how we can kind of find our way of resilience, how we can prepare for what might be ahead. And I think there may be some tough times ahead, but how the everyday person can build resilience in themselves, in how they go about their lives, and kind of build that stuff in. There's a lot of people haven't been to war. A lot of people haven't been in the military, or a police officer. They're just the average soccer mom that's going through life trying to keep her mind from exploding by raising 4 kids, So how do we convey that to just the general person, the general American citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're definitely going through turbulent times in American history. We got $34 trillion of debt. We're fighting more proxy wars and have more foreign adversaries than we've ever had before. It's a very complicated governing issue that the American government deals with all the time. But there's 2 layers to that. There's, looking up and out, and then there's looking down and in. And I feel like a lot of Americans are too focused on what's going on in social media and how the government's governing everything around them, and less caring about how they govern themselves. I mean, you can't virtue signal. I mean, you can because people do, but you can't virtue signal about how bad the government is if you can't, or you fail to govern yourself, your family, and your community. I want people to also realize, I've heard this debate, especially amongst Christians, that if you're a good Christian, somehow that disavows you or removes you from the political conversation because it's all according to God's plan. There's a lot of analogies to communicate about that, and I won't bore the listeners, but the bottom line is it is your responsibility. And the people who create policies can change and manipulate the direction of this country in so many ways that affect even your ability to freely worship your own God. And so we know we're fighting for many amendments, especially our First Amendment. And I'm a believer that that Second Amendment is a superpower that the American people have, because it's not for hunting. It's not for your local IPSC or 2 or 3 gun competition. It's for to remain a balance of powers between people and governance, especially radical governance. It's one of the reasons why, the government can pop off, but they're very limited in what they can actually do because you have a superpower and an American insurgency that will hand the government their butts. It's one of the reasons why I don't think Russia, North Korea, or Iran will be doing any airborne operations and invading our country anytime soon, because they know what they will get. And so if I had to give some tangible advice to Americans, it's get more concerned and also more involved in your personal life and developing your health and wellness, that of your family, which by proxy will benefit your community. There are a lot of things that the federal government is doing wrong, like completely inflating and growing, and there's no balance. The balance you have is at the personal level in the confines of the walls that surround you in your own home to make a difference. Yeah. And I would say, paying attention to that family unit. I got criticism about this whole thing that happened with me with this DV case, this domestic violence case that was dismissed, that, you talk about family, you talk about all this stuff, but obviously your family isn't together and you don't have your stuff together. It's like, yeah, we're going through turbulent times. That's called overcoming adversity, because I will overcome it. Just like everybody else does in this world. The difference between me and potentially you is I'm willing to fight and never give up. And when you have that mindset, that mentality, it becomes contagious in your own home. And so I don't think anybody's going to be perfect. I'm certainly not. But the less time you spend on your cell phone scrolling TikTok, the more likely you'll pay attention to what's going on that's more important than your virtual reality, which is your actual reality. And so yeah, this whole thing has taught me like, and I spend a lot of time on social media doing a whole bunch of stuff to propagate a company that doesn't make me any more happier developing and growing wealth. It's really about the people. It's really about my family. And so I've changed some priorities in my own life. But guess what? That's an azimuth check that happens all the time. And we should constantly do that. I think we'll be better served and better off the more we get grounded and foundationally rooted in the basics. Lastly, I would say, ultimately, we live in a country where, especially men, but people aren't willing to be vulnerable. They're not willing to have a conversation and be honest, especially politicians. Mm-hmm. You can govern yourself and not worry about the government governing you and live a very fulfilled life. If all hell breaks loose and this country falls apart, it doesn't fall apart. It's one of the reasons that the founding fathers created a decentralized United States, because the states will govern themselves. So if you want some tangible advice, if you're worried about the future, get in a state that you like, that shares your same values. Start working on your family, start working on your faith, start building your communities. And that strong, the family unit and all the things that it affects and impacts will be stronger than any federal government on any inch of the planet by far.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that this thing starts, if we want, for lack of a better term, another revolution, this country to actually get back to what it was founded as, it starts from the grassroots. It starts from the personal side. It doesn't start who's in the White House. That can help, but that's not the real core of the problem. The core of the problem is, like you said, we've gotten too distracted with all of the comforts, all of the creature comforts that we live with every day. We can order food. We can have it delivered to our doorstep. We don't even have to go get groceries anymore. We can have somebody else do that. So we're living with comforts that wars would have been fought over, centuries ago. And we still are so unfulfilled. We're still so unhappy. We're still so empty. And we can't figure out why. It's because we don't have purpose and we're not pouring into the things around us. We're more concerned what our favorite celebrity on YouTube or TikTok is doing than we are about what our kids are doing down the hallway.
Yeah, spot on, man.
See,
yeah, I was getting ready to say, you said get out of the state. We're in the People's Republic of Illinois, so I guess we'll have to move to Tennessee.
I'll tell you, Mike, something I've enjoyed from your content recently actually is seeing you with your kids. I know some people kind of frown on, well, I don't know if I want to put my kids on social media or not, or I don't want to, should I expose them to the world that way or not? But just from an end user perspective, man, I think it is really cool to see you interacting and doing just normal dad stuff with your kids, like motorcycles or bikes or whatever. And I don't know if that's something that you've just thought about doing more of recently. Maybe you've done more of it and I haven't seen all of it, but what's your feeling on getting them more involved, kind of what you're doing as far as social media stuff?
Yeah, I think it's important to be genuine. I haven't, I've never, look, there is no persona in me on social media. What you see is what you get. And that's who I am. If I'm, yelling at the camera because I'm mad about Uvalde officers not going in to save kids, or if I'm, showing my kids and getting them a new bike, that's all organic to my life. It's typically never programmed. I mean, unless it's something with Fieldcraft Survival and we're trying to release it, it's always just organic content that I feel compelled to discuss. And what I've realized in doing that, I think I started that maybe a year and a half ago, was when I started posting about being a dad, I got a lot of feedback from men who were like, "Hey, thanks for saying that." I did a post a few months ago about spanking my kids and how, I'm not against spanking your kids, but it's not the most effective tactic. In fact, I think it's one action arm of many tactics you bring to bear against a very intelligent child who's manipulating you and who potentially has a discipline problem. And when I did that post, it got a lot of good feedback because people were like, "Hey, man, I'm glad you're not the only one, or I'm not the only one, or this could be talked about openly because for some reason we can't have these conversations." And that's the positive impact of social media. And so I'm not afraid to put my children on to an extent. I see the extreme component where these people are monetizing heavily off their children because they're converting these interactions into a child program, and they're pimping out their kids. That I'll never do. That I don't agree with. But any organic content I could do to be a positive influence on fathers, or just motivate people to get out there and spend more time with their kids, because I have fun doing it. The kids seem to enjoy it. I'll do that. I'll continue to do that for sure.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I think we need strong fathers. And it is funny you say that about spanking. It's like that's like the going to war after all the diplomacy with your kids.
Yeah, exactly. You've lost if you're spanking your kids already.
Yeah. So
I mean, maybe we can get Tony Blauer back on to do like a psychological warfare,
That works better than spanking them.
It's like you're gonna win this battle.
Yeah.
Losing, man.
Oh man. Yeah. Me and my wife are outnumbered, and sometimes it's really difficult, but, but, no, it's really cool to see the adversity, people going through adversity and coming out stronger. And I think that's really the key to adversity or endurance, is you should be coming out stronger, whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally, spiritually. All of those things should be building blocks. There's a scripture that talks about how all of those things we go through in our lives build character. And that's the most important thing, is if you have good character, then you're going to have the North Star. You're going to be rooted in something that means something, and you're going to know what your principles are. You're going to know how you're going to handle all of these situations. Sometimes you don't know until you go through those hard times who you really are. And I think that's just a huge key for anybody that's going through something rough, to understand that you go through these things and it sucks. It's awful and you hate every moment of it. But when you come out, you're a different person. You're a better person if you actually learn from those things.
Yeah, I have a sergeant major brain, and I've always focused on after action reviews and lessons learned, because I want to share those experiences. I did it in the military, where I shared lessons learned in combat, and I never wanted guys around me to make the same mistake. So when I go through something personal, despite a lot of the things I don't want to say out loud because it makes me more vulnerable, I think when I do that, it makes me feel better about the circumstance and solidifying that I am human. I do make mistakes. And also, I want to have the strength to overcome this. It kind of invigorates that affirmation that I need to hear it outside of my head, spoken out loud. And most importantly, I hope it helps somebody. The things that I went through very specifically, revolving around the lack of communication, postpartum, a bad interaction, miscommunication. If somebody else can, learn from that lesson, I'm all about it, man. And so, I don't do social media to make money. I don't have to do social media. I do it more so to stay connected with people and for people to take away some lessons learned from me making my own mistakes.
I find it's almost like therapy or something a little bit, because there's not a whole lot of times that military guys or cops, there's not a whole lot of opportunities to actually talk about what you're feeling about certain things. Because a lot of times, I told my wife this a million times, but most of the stuff I did in my career, she has no idea. She kind of has a basic understanding of it, but it's difficult to talk about stuff when people have no clue what you're talking about. Or just sometimes for dudes, it's just hard to talk about stuff in general. But getting on a podcast with a couple dudes that are fairly like-minded, all of a sudden you can just kind of really talk about stuff that you might not have ever talked about with anybody else before. So I'm kind of finding the same thing out that you've discovered already, I think, is that the whole podcast thing really is therapeutic. It's just a really good avenue to talk about some of those things. And my wife would probably say, well, how come you don't talk about this stuff with me? But I'm just saying it is a really good platform to be able to release some of that.
Yeah, if I pay attention to history, especially Native American history, and trying to, learn from some of the things they developed through lots of years of chaos and tribal conflict and obviously conflict with the United States. And a lot of the things they did was they vocalized some of those interactions and some of those traumas fireside. They did so because they trust the men and women and braves and warriors around their fire. And so, you don't have to start a podcast. You don't have to go to therapy. You can start with your own fire pit in your backyard in urban America. You can start at the dinner table. You can start at, a conversation after church, but having those frank conversations about things that are weighing on you is what relinquishes a lot of that, spillover of all that trauma we hold in our cup. And the realization for many is, especially today, and I see it and you guys see it, is we don't have the capacity like we used to deal with these type of traumas. It's why drug overdoses, suicides across the board, really any mental health correlated statistic has gone up in the bad. And so I would just encourage anybody who's thinking about, the burdens that weigh on them, communicate it to somebody that you love or somebody that will listen. Heck, say it out loud to yourself. Sometimes just articulating the words and turning some chaos that's fog in your head into some kind of articulation and structure of words help understand what you're going through. I think it's crucially important, especially where we had a buy-in that social media was going to make us more social, and it hasn't. It's actually further divided us.
Yeah, somebody else that is using the podcast platform a lot lately is Trump, and he's getting ready to go on Joe Rogan on Friday, I think.
That's right.
What advice would you give to Trump here going down the stretch? Like, you're his, one of his top advisors. He comes to meet with Glover, like, hey brother, what do I need to do as a candidate here to kind of bring this home? What kind of advice would you give him?
Oh, it's the same advice I give him on Rogan's podcast, which is just be you. Don't look for any forecasts. Don't look for any scripts. Don't look for any questions deliberately that you have to navigate in your head. Just be organic about the conversation. Yeah. So on Trump, if I had to give him advice, look, I just tell him to be himself. The unfortunate thing is we live in a political landscape where most politicians are bought, whether by BlackRock, Big Pharma, using corporate national media as a propaganda arm. Trump's not been bought. He's an independent sole proprietor. He's done it his own way. And that's a threat to the establishment. And he knows it. He can't even go to McDonald's and have interactions with employees and customers without being demonized as some radical. So I think the best thing he could do is be himself, because that's already convinced me and a lot of other people that he's going to save this country, and it needs saving, because any other option is going to mean likely the rapid degradation of our Constitution and our liberties.
I think the immigration thing and the border, people talk about it a lot and just like, yeah, that's it's a problem we need to get fixed. I don't think people really truly understand how incredibly huge of a problem this is. And if you just go to New York City or Chicago and ask the people that have to live, like, hey, here's a 4,000 room apartment complex that is completely full of migrants, or brand new hotels in Chicago that are just filled with illegal immigrants. Like, it is just going crazy. And if you just multiply that by 2 years or 4 years or whatever and see where that's going to go. This is a big, big problem. And like you said, there's only one person in this election that's going to try to do anything at all to stop that. And so regardless of your feelings about, we're not trying to hire somebody to be the Pope. We're trying to hire somebody in a group of people that can fix some of these problems. And man, it's just, I don't understand how people can sweep this under the rug. It's probably because they live in a place where they're not affected by it yet.
Yeah.
Martha's Vineyard, wherever you name the place. But the people, and it's crazy, the people in Chicago, New York City, the people you think would be just so for the Democrats, they're the ones screaming loudly, somebody please do something to save us from this craziness, the Venezuelan gangs, the illegal immigration. It is really breaking down society already. It's already happening.
Yep.
And man, that stuff, that will not take long. It is exponentially getting worse. And you think, well, that might take 20 years to get, it'd probably take a couple more years of how we're going right now with this immigration thing. And it's going to be busting at the seams in a lot of places. Big cities, Aurora, what you name it, are already in big trouble.
Yeah.
I think the biggest fear I have is the degradation of civil liberties. And, the First Amendment has already been called by globalists like Bill Gates and Kamala Harris as being a threat to democracy. I mean, they call it censorship. And it's like, if that's the campaign you're running on, and if more control, more Marxist, social, and communist ideology is the solution to our problems, that's a huge problem. That's a huge red flag. And I just also, I want somebody standing on substance. I mean, Kamala Harris can't speak about anything without a teleprompter, and when her teleprompter crashes, she has nothing to say because she has no real substance and life experience that lends anything to the table, which is why, she's the second runner up behind her sleeping boss, Joe Biden. And so I don't want to be vile in the political nature of what's going on, but we should take it really serious. And I think this is a turning point for the country, and hopefully it goes the right way. I'm not so optimistic about it going the right way because, when you see an address get 4,700 ballots, you wonder, can this be trusted? And I think the overwhelming majority of listeners and voters and Americans overall don't trust the system as it sits. So I think it's going to be a huge problem either way.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in for rough times because reality is, we saw 2020. We all lived through that craziness. And, we also know that probably can't trust governmental law enforcement agencies very well because they're also controlled by people that not necessarily the people on the ground agents, but there are those higher up that they don't like us as American citizens as a rule, especially Christian conservatives that represent the fact, what this country was built on, and they want to change it and shape it in their image. And I think that we have some troubled waters ahead, no matter what the turnout. If things go well, Trump wins, and things start to be set back in place, I don't think that they're going to stop fighting or they're going to stop trying to control people. I think that's absolutely coming, no matter what, and we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I know. Recently, somebody yelled "Jesus is Lord" at a Kamala Harris rally, and she said, something like, "This isn't the rally for you, at the wrong rally." The same thing was said to JD Vance, where the person yelled out, "Jesus is King," and he acknowledged that Jesus is King. Trump has talked about his conviction and faith, especially as his life was almost taken on a stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. I think that's important to differentiate between the two. It's like somebody who stands on their ideology. I don't care what you stand on, just stand for something. And the fact that he could stand for his Christian background and faith and not be afraid to say it, where so many others are so afraid to offend somebody, is telling as well.
I think the way we just, to me, it's not like you can go knock on your neighbor's door and say, you need to vote for Trump. But what we can do, I think, is voice our opinions.
Mhm.
It used to be you'd ask somebody, who are you voting for? And it was like, oh, that's a private matter. I don't talk about that. And that's just between me and my family. And I'm like, that's a wasted opportunity to me. And it's just like the crowd, the mob mentality. As soon as one guy raises their arm, everybody else is like, oh, that guy did that. So I'm going to raise my arm too. And nobody's afraid to stand back anymore. Once you see that there are people on your side that believe the way you do, you are, more motivated to join and vocalize being a part of that group. And so, yeah, I absolutely tell people that ask me right up front, who are you voting for? I'm going to vote for Trump. Why? Because of the big picture policies. He's, against abortion, and he's for lowering taxes, and he's for closing the border. And we can go on for an hour, and I'm for all of those things. That's why. And so I think if this is just the day and age where it's not going to do anybody good if we sit back in silence and just claim that that's just a private matter. You can say that if you want to, but I don't think you're making things progress anymore just by sitting back on the sideline.
Mhm.
So we were talking earlier about firearms training, doing the basics, the fundamentals, and talking about some rifle stuff. So I think I heard you talking about Fieldcraft you're going to do some type of new rifle program where so I think people buy a rifle and then you guys put them through this entire, is that right? What you guys are getting ready to do, or is that something you've done already?
Yeah, we're partnering with BCM and Vortex, some of our favorite companies that do not pay me or pay Fieldcraft Survival, that we just worked with because they have the best, highest quality products in the industry. I talked to Bravo Company and Paul, the owner, and said, "Hey, man, look, I want to start this gunfighter program, and I want to build a package to optimize the DMR, the designated marksmanship rifle, a carbine, and then do a pistol gunfighter course as well, where people show up, they get all the kit and the equipment. That's the stuff that we recommend, and then teach them from scratch everything from breaking it down, cleaning it, zeroing it, understanding mil radian on a variable magnified optic that has a mil radian reticle, and then putting them through training with that particular weapon system so they understand the capability, but also how far they could push it. A lot of people show up at our courses, like DMR is a great example, and you'll see 20 different types of rifles and types of optics, and people don't know why they have that optic on their gun. I see guys with minute of angle still. I went to sniper school 15 years ago with a minute of angle M24 short or long action 7.62 or 308. And it's like, well, I mean, that's a hunting rifle that's optimized with MOA. We've advanced so much since then with a ballistic calculator, with a Horus reticle, with things that I saw in my military career, and just it hasn't gotten out there in the civilian space. So instead of showing up and kind of telling people, hey, this is the gun or this is the equipment that you should have, I'm going to run an exclusive program called the Gunfighter Program, and we're going to offer the equipment. And essentially the way it works out is essentially they're getting the training for free. I mean, it's a 3-day experience. They get the equipment, they pay for the equipment, they get the lodging, all the meals, and then they get the training. And I'm only going to do it in limited form. I advertise to my Patreon guys first, and then I'll put it to my little subgroups, and then I'll put it up to the open market. But it's only going to be 48 slots or 12 people per course, taught 4 times a year per system setup. So pistol, carbine, and DMR. We got a special. The first year is going to be flat dark earth for all of the weapon systems, including the pistol, likely. And then that's serialized and numbered and very specific. And it's, this isn't me taking a gun from BCM. This is a BCM produced product via our specifications for the gunfighter program.
That's really cool.
That's awesome, man. I think people.
What didn't we think of that?
Yeah, a little late to the game there, but I think a lot of people will be, Fieldcraft has got a lot of good, just faithful customers, a lot of repeat. We've seen in the classes we did a lot of repeat customers, and people we had one guy. So we're in far southern Illinois. We had one guy from Chicago, Israel, or Bean, name, car mechanic, and he drove. We had a 2-day pistol on a Saturday and carbine on Sunday. And he drove down from Chicago 5 hours before the class on Saturday, did the class all day, drove home to Chicago that night, drove to Marion Sunday morning from Chicago. And after
the and he's done that like 3 or 4 times.
He's like, I just don't like hotels very much.
And he's getting an RV, man. I don't like hotels either. You're just getting an RV, sleep in the back of your pickup truck.
Well, I think that'll be some people really interested in. That'll definitely be.
Well, there's so much information out there, and there's so many opinions, and I mean, we do product reviews too, and all that kind of stuff. But it's good to, a lot of people just tell me what I need to get.
Yeah, that's huge. That's what it stemmed from. The conversation of like, hey man, I love that you guys go back and forth and give us options, but just like if you had to pick one, what would it be? And that is what this course is. It's like, I'm tired of giving people choices. Like right. if you're focused on DMR, it's for us, it's a 16-inch recce. We have a stainless steel barrel. So it's an optimized barrel. That's basically the same barrel in an SPR. And it's optimized with a 1-to-10 variable, magnified optic vortex scope. Same thing with the carbine. It's 11.5-inch, gunfighter upper that you can tether to your own, or you could buy the whole setup. But it's like, that's the go-to, because I've been running the same thing, and anything under, I think SOCOM did the evaluation, anything under 10.5 was deemed too short based on 1 and 7 twist with, 62 grain and up. So 11.5 it is. We're mating that with a UH1 from Vortex. And then, pistol, I think I'm going to go with a Glock, because I don't want to out budget people, because that is a consideration. And, staccatos are beautiful. I got one myself, a P11 limited, but a Glock has been tried and true throughout combat. And it's, the basic platform that we could build off of, and we'll do some building off of that. Like the first few hours of that entire class is going to be putting your kit together and making a stock Glock 17 Gen 3, which isn't the greatest, a little bit better, actually a lot better. Let's be honest, with the Brownell catalog, with all the things that we're going to do, it's going to make it a lot better and then more efficient. And then we'll start off with the basics.
That's cool.
Yeah. Where are you going to run? Where are you going to do these classes at?
To be honest, like we have it set for Utah, but I'm open to coming out to Illinois. I'm open to running these programs. I actually very specifically have never said this out loud and never marketed this, but I do want to do it across the country to give people opportunities in specific geographical locations. I'm a fan of Utah. The mountains of Utah are outside of my window right now, and I always want to be close to them, but I do want to spread the love throughout the country. And so I might break this out, run pistol, carbine, DMR in different locations, just to give more people the opportunity to train throughout the country.
Amen. But you can't do a carbine class here. Assault weapons banned.
Well, if they're not citizens of Illinois, they can.
Yeah, you can come here from another state.
As ironic as that. Yeah.
For sure. So what else? I guess lastly, so as far as headquarters out there in Utah, what do you got going on at Fieldcraft HQ these days?
A lot going on, man. We got, we have a whole bunch of classes that we do every single weekend across the country. Fieldcraft HQ is home to Fieldcraft Jiu-Jitsu. We do personal defense classes that are SIMS-based classes. I'm on the road. I'm teaching a sold-out class in Washington State, doing preparedness seminars again, and we do local seminars We also do free training every Wednesday for the public, everything from first aid and tourniquet application to situational awareness. Yeah, we're just all over the place. And, most of the stuff that we do, if people want to kind of vector into it, it's the Fieldcraft Survival app. It's the free YouTube channel. It's all the stuff that we have on social media for basic education to, stir the pot and plant the seed for people who are interested in the idea of being prepared.
Cool, man. I thought it would be cool to get at some point a bunch of Fieldcraft instructors. We've had Rick Lofton out here at our range before, and Matt Shea and some other guys, and it'd be cool to get a bunch of together in one spot maybe and do some training or do some shooting.
Yeah, I need to do a class out there. I'd be up for teaching out there. That'd be cool.
Well, the invitation's always open, man. We appreciate it. We love talking to like-minded people, warriors, guys that have been through life, and we really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us, man. Hopefully this isn't the last time. Hopefully we can get together again sometime down the road, and hopefully we can train together soon and just kind of sharpen each other a little bit in ways. So it was awesome to have you, and we really appreciate your time, bro.
Yeah, thank you very much, man. I want to say thank you to all your listeners, and hopefully we'll be able to do that post the election. If everything goes right, we'll get into training. It will be the most important thing in the history of the country, or just be a normal everyday gunfighter course.
Yeah, there might be a whole lot of rewinding some podcasts.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Wrong or not. So.
Yep. Thank you very much. And to everyone else out there, thank you for joining along with us. Remember to take Jesus wherever you go and act like you believe. We'll see you guys next time. Cool.